you want to introduce yourselves? I know we had a quick introduction, but give your title, your name, and maybe your background for the audience. I'll start with you, Jim.
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. It's very nice to be here. My name is Jim Shanahan. I've been in the payment business for about 25 years or so. I started out working for the bigger companies like American Express and MasterCard and Chase and MBNA. And I have been involved with new products in all of those companies. And so it's been very interesting to see the progression. After paying consultants about $10 million at those four companies, I decided to be one myself and take some of that. And I did that for 10 years in the 90s with a firm called Business Dynamics, and we worked all around the world and for about 100 different companies. And then I became an entrepreneur, and I was the CEO of a card processor in China for a few years, and most recently was the CEO of a prepaid card processor called Maverick Network Solutions that was just acquired by Fiserv, which is a bank technology processor, and now that is their prepaid card platform. So if you sign up with Fiserv for prepaid cards, you'll be using our system. And glad to be here and spend some time with you in this panel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Oliphant. I'm the Managing Director at Soaring Ventures. I've been in payments for about 30 years. I started a company called IC Verify, which was my first entry into the payments world, which was the first PC-based payment software. That started a ISO called PPI that's still in existence, and did several other startups. Then got into the venture world and did investing in security and in payments. And then most recently, I was the CIO, which is both the Chief Information Officer and the Innovation Officer at Heartland Payment Systems. I was there the last 3 years. I left Heartland in September and got back into the investment consulting world. And happy to be here.
I'm Nick Holland. I'm with Yankee Group. I haven't had quite the experience that these two gentlemen have. I've only been in the industry about 10 years. But in terms of the mobile payment space, I'm a bit of a veteran. I've been following it since they were looking at Bluetooth as a way for paying. So it's an interesting time. It's kind of finally become fashionable. It was one of these things that really wasn't going to happen for a long time. And I was saying it's 2 years off for probably every year for the last 10 years. I think it's 2 years off. So we're hedging my bets there. But no, I think. It's a very interesting time. Things are finally happening, and very glad to be here.
Good morning. My name is Arkady Friedman. I work for PayPal in our corporate development and global strategy team. I've been with the firm about 12 years, so one of the few employees at PayPal who can claim to be in first 50. So I've been in the space for a little while. Actually, I had pretty broad background. This is actually my fourth or fifth industry in general, but this is one that I am going to stick to for a while, and a lot of interesting stuff happening. I'm very excited to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I want to start off by basically laying down a bit of a landscape. I do a lot of mentoring in the Boston area for young companies and young startups, and it seems to me as if payments has almost become the new internet. These guys only know the last year or 2 years of the landscape. Could you take a few minutes and walk us through why things are the way they are? How they were associations, Visa, MasterCard before, they've gone public, and what's different now in the marketplace versus a few years ago? Who would like to start?
I'll take that one because I used to work at MasterCard, and what's the big change is that when MasterCard and Visa, before they were public, they were not-for-profit companies that were owned by the banks. And their total purpose was to serve the banks, and in particular what we call the card issuers, the credit card issuers of the banks mostly. With all due respect to our acquiring friends here, there was the credit card issuing guys that sort of called the shots. And at a certain point, there were only 10 of them that controlled 80% of the market. So you had 10 people sort of making the decisions to benefit their pocketbook and their companies. What's happened since they became public is that now they were responsible to shareholders and needed to maximize revenues. And once they started to do that, the whole landscape changed and the way that they view things changed. And has implications for everybody in this room that's involved in this business. And at the same time, I guess we have lots of other competitors coming in and other entities that for gaining some control as well. And certainly PayPal is probably almost like part of the establishment at this point, but we're seeing a big shift. You know, the merchants, the acceptors, a lot of you folks work for transit. You know, the power of the merchant community in the payment industry is very large and bigger than it's ever been. So it's really a different ball game, a radically different ball game, and we're still trying to understand how that whole thing fits together.
Yeah, I think I would just add that it's been astonishing to sort of look at the change from associations to where I think Visa, MasterCard are going today, where they're actually going after acquiring business. They're directly going out and talking to merchants. They're trying to shift share, and you know, that's a very different ball game, at least in the acquiring world, than we've ever seen since they were started over 50 years ago. I think also that, you know, them being incumbents has given them a challenge to figure out how they're going to stay an incumbent with a lot of people and a lot of new technologies that are both complementary and competing to the basic Visa MasterCard model. So as a public companies now, I think that having to live quarter to quarter, having to innovate, having to change the speed at which they change, that's a huge change for the associations, and it's interesting to watch how they're coping with that.
I second that. I mean, I think they're kind of, you've got a situation now where they're growing up in the public eye. We had speaking before this session, they seem to be kind of like, although they're well-established companies, they're like teenagers in some respects. They're, they're having to be accountable to new business practices. Obviously, the regulatory environment's changing, and they're under the scrutiny of shareholders, so that kind of accelerates what they're doing, where previously it could be a lot longer term. I think the other thing to consider as well is the world is going digital, and in fact, with players like PayPal coming to market, the card issuing business can be somewhat disintermediated with mobile over time. So you've got a situation where, although the world is very plastic driven, it's a situation that is in flux, and certainly there is room for newcomers to come to market. So it's a fascinating time in that the established status quo isn't as solid as it was before, certainly not even 5 years ago.
Great. No, it's actually very interesting. PayPal started off as a closed payments network, so we've always kind of owned the customer on both on the sending side as well as the receiving side. So when you take a look at what the networks are doing and a lot of other players in the payment space globally, you see a lot of folks moving further up the stack to get much closer to the customer. And I think there are a lot of implications of kind of the traditional models where the customer was owned more kind of on the issuing or the acquiring side, and what that means in the long term. So it's something that doesn't necessarily affect us directly because we've always owned the customer, but it's something very interesting to see what the implications of that are going to be long term.
Excellent. Let's keep talking about change. Let's talk about the growth of debit. Most of us know about the explosion of debit transactions back in the 90s. Now, a decade later, government regulation has finally come in and was enacted in early October. How do you guys think that its continued growth will impact merchants as well as transit? Who would like to start?
Debit, it's unbelievable what happened to debit. I was on the credit card side. We never thought it would become what it did. But there's a big lesson there, I think, too. The reason it really took off was they basically took the ATM cards that everybody had and they threw a MasterCard and Visa logo on, as opposed to having it go through one of the EFT networks like Most or Mac or NICE and Honor, et cetera, et cetera. And there's sort of a lesson for consumer convenience there, I think. It was so easy for consumers, it just took off. And I think this year, or last year or this year, it's crisscrossing credit. It's bigger than credit, and it's amazing. And there's, of course, a lot of implications on the pricing side for it that I think are very interesting at this point.
At Heartland, we did about 5.5 billion transactions a year, and as of last year, 70% of those overall transactions were now debit. So it was amazing for me to see, because credit really seems to be shrinking, I think, both because of the economy and because of the different debit products that are out there. And I think there's an analogy actually between debit and NFC, and we'll get to it later, I know, but for